Last week, as I began, as I said, a long series on happiness, I invited your questions, which were really awesome. I so appreciate. You'll see in the talk tonight that they very much have affected what I will teach on tonight. So keep those cards and letters coming. One of the questions was related to, it's like this now. What if it's like this now isn't okay? You know, a wondering, I'm sure, is not unfamiliar to us all. So I thought I'd offer a little guidance in the meditation around that. And you will see in the guidance that the teachings that the Buddha offers us and that have come down to us for centuries really are not a one-size-fits-all. Even though they're sort of general principles, general guidance, how we implement those principles really is quite personal. It's what the Buddha meant when he said, make of yourself a light. He wasn't inviting us to make up the principles, the principles of non-harming, or the principles of kindness, or the principles of compassion. But he was inviting us to contemplate deeply, how does that work here, for me, now, with this? And so you'll see, not only tonight, and you'll see in our teachings, that really the invitation is to contemplate, to look and see. Remember Ajahn Chah famously said, you know, sometimes you'll see me or you'll hear me telling somebody, no, go right, no, you're going to fall off the right side of the road. And other times you'll hear me saying, no, go left, you're going to fall off the left side of the road. He said, it depends on which side of the road you're likely to fall off on. And so that's really, so in all of the teachings, and certainly as we explore through the year, these teachings on happiness, all of the teachings are, all right, they're inviting us, all right, how does this work with this? With this? With this? And you've heard me say before, if you're not puzzled, you're not paying attention. You know, if you don't bump into things that don't make any sense whatsoever, then we're just skating along in some kind of conceptual land that doesn't really bring it into our lives and our daily practice. So I thought I'd offer a bit of an invitation tonight, but this bit of preamble, because I just really want, no matter what I say, for the invitation to be very intimate for you. How does that work here, with this, right now? And it might even work, whether you're here at the church or whether you're home, it might even work that you might decide that you don't, you know, what you see is that, you know, I'll invite us to bring attention in part to our bodies, to see what your body wants. It might want to lie down. It might want to do a walking meditation instead of a sitting meditation, to really let yourself trust and inquire your own experience. So it's like this now, but it doesn't mean we sort of die there. It's like this now as a place of inquiry. How do the teachings help me release suffering with this? Okay, so we'll play with it a little bit. So a long series on happiness. And I was just telling someone, I really am imagining that it is a series that we will develop together, so that your questions and comments and inquiries will really have a big impact on how this all unfolds. To wit, at the end of the evening last week, and someone asked a question that was actually echoed quite a number of times in the written questions that you offered. And the question was something about deserving, you know? And what if I don't think I deserve to be happy? And I just want you to know that if you asked that question, you were not by any means alone. Happiness. What if I don't think I actually deserve to be happy? So instead of beginning right away with the first of those 5 kinds of happiness, the sensory pleasure, I decided to pause as we begin and look into deservingness a little bit. We'll probably revisit it as we go along. And I just want you to know that not only are you in good company with one another, but you're in good company. I'm going to read you something here. As is the case for many, the story I told myself for years was that I didn't deserve to be happy. Throughout my childhood, I believed that something must be intrinsically wrong with me, because things in my life were pretty awful, and she gives compelling examples, and never seemed to change for the better. My childhood, and indeed her early adulthood, continue to unfold through terrifying uprooting turns and incomprehensible losses. My immense grief, anger, and confusion remained held inside. Whenever the cover slipped, I scrambled to hide the feelings or distort them so that no one would really know, especially not myself. I came to know very well the protection of distance, of a narrowed, compressed world. Though it was my own act of pulling back, I felt forsaken. I told myself a story that there was no way out of the world that turned me in upon myself. I won't ask for a show of hands, but many of us can recognize some of those sentiments in one form or another. You've heard me speak many times of the astonishment of great spiritual teachers to learn of this. Alan Wallace talks about his teacher on a 3-year retreat who never did believe him that he struggled with this. He thought he was kidding. He thought he was just kind of pulling his leg, a Tibetan teacher. You know the question that Sharon Salzberg asked the Dalai Lama about, she says, what do you think about self-hatred? I was eager to get directly to the suffering, she says. I had seen it so often in my students, a suffering I was familiar with myself. So what do you think about self-hatred, she asked the Dalai Lama. The room went quiet as all of us awaited the answer of this revered teacher. Looking startled, he turned to his translator and asked pointedly in Tibetan again and again and again and again for an explanation. Finally, turning back to me, he tilted his head, his eyes narrowed in confusion. Self-hatred, he repeated in English. What is that? And in another book, Howard Cutler, who wrote a book with the Dalai Lama, said that that shortly after that, the Dalai Lama was with him. And so he asked him, he said, do you know anything about this? I don't really get it. You know, Tibetans don't understand this at all. And I think I'll go into that a little bit more in a future session, maybe in the kind of Thursday's separate session that we have. But we'll inquire just a little bit more into the Dalai Lama's perspective. That first quote, by the way, the first quote, the person who said, the story I told myself for years was that I didn't deserve to be happy, was Sharon Salzberg. Hence her question of the Dalai Lama. Talk to me about self-hatred. And then Sharon goes on later, this is in her book on faith. The Buddha's promise is that freeing the mind from habits of anguish and fear is a real and attainable goal, not just for him, not just for a few others, but for everyone who makes the effort. That all beings want to be happy and in fact deserve to be happy is emblazoned throughout. Our ingrained habit of viewing life as though standing with our noses pressed against the bakery window, believing that none of the goodies inside could possibly be for us here, now, runs right up against this boundless, breathtaking inclusivity. The voice of the inner critic pulls us outside that bakery window saying, life, freedom, happiness, love are for others, not for you. The Buddha holds out his hand, offering to bring us directly inside. Well, that's all well and good. We can still not believe we deserve it. Which actually brings us in part to the purpose of making this a whole year of not only teachings on Tuesday night, but an opportunity on one Thursday a month to practice a little bit more deeply. Because in the second part that I read, that was also from Sharon, she used the word practice, but we can kind of overlook that. We can think of it as like, well, it's just one more thing we are doing wrong, you know? Your practice is supposed to be happy. I don't know what your problem is, you know? Clearly, you're defective here again as well. But it's really not that simple, and I can talk to you more about the reasons why, especially for us in our Western culture, it's not really quite that simple, and it requires practice. Neuropsychologists would say it requires us to retrain our brains. You've heard me talk. I remember, I really quite distinctly remember, it was quite some years ago now, where I first realized that I had brain damage. And it was such a relief. It's like, oh, that's what's wrong. Okay, well, we can practice with that, you know. So to imagine, and that's where the Dalai Lama, his confusion comes in. He says, I can't understand how anyone, I could read you quotes and quotes and quotes from the Dalai Lama, I can't understand how anyone could possibly believe that they don't deserve to be happy. It's because we have brain damage. Huh? Oh, is that all? That's workable. Cool. So the practice of cultivating happiness invites a real curiosity, a real investigation, a willingness to exert effort. You know, if I had a auto accident tonight on my way home and a head injury, you would not be surprised to imagine that I needed to do some therapy, huh? To relearn how to do whatever. Train my brain, train my body, train my being, to relearn something. And so really the challenge is to relearn something that we, and especially in our Western cultures, have lost sight of. Eastern cultures, not so much. I'll talk more about that probably on this Thursday, unless at the end of tonight's talk you tell me to do something different on Thursday the 22nd, in which case we'll do something different. So a willingness. You think about, you know, somebody who had a stroke or something like that, who's in rehab, would really need to have a willingness to exert effort. It doesn't mean we torture ourselves with that effort, nor do we torture ourselves with judgments about why we need to exert that effort, but nevertheless, curiosity, investigation, willingness to exert some effort. Ajahn, you've heard me speak of Ajahn Amaro, tells of, he did what's called a tudong, where they go out with just their begging bowls and walk. And he did it for a whole year. He said for a whole year after that, he said after that he realized that when there was something that was arising in his awareness, his default tendency was to worry about it. So this is after he had been a monastic for, 40 gazillion years. And he had this insight. He saw that his default tendency was to worry, get anxious about what was going to happen next when they were on the road. And that once he realized that, he practiced with it diligently for a year before he was able to kind of begin to soften that tendency. But if we don't imagine that we deserve to be happy, that it is our birthright, we won't know, we won't have the beginnings energy to really bring to practices that could possibly help. So for starters, we have to kind of take it on faith. What I read to you was in Sharon Salzberg's book on faith. We have to imagine that the Dalai Lama is onto something when he goes, "What are you talking about? I truly have no idea." So if I have a stroke and I'm in rehab, I have to take it a bit on faith if somebody says, actually I just did, I had a little knee thing going on, And I went to physical therapy. I had to take it on faith that those stupid exercises, you know those stupid exercises they give you, but I had to take it on faith that maybe they would help. And you know what? They really did. Imagine my surprise. So like anything though, it's important that the efforts be skillfully directed. In that case, I needed a physical therapist. Otherwise, we can just keep practicing and keep in ways that aren't so skillful and keep digging ourselves into deeper holes. Again, that's really what we're going to try to do over the course of a year. So we have grown up learning, not inherent, not part of our nature. We have learned to interpret our experience in creating a self-identity of unworthiness through our constructed stories. We make sense of things that have happened to us by explaining them in stories. And the thing about those stories is they take on a life of their own. We can read the newspaper. Tomorrow morning, some of us will read the newspaper and we go, how do people believe these things? Huh? Well, that's how it works. People hear stories. They hear stories and they receive them. They are both given and received with a lot of emotional energy. And they torque, what can I say? They cause brain damage. Huh? And we believe the stories. And we have to be willing to inquire with some curiosity. Maybe those stories were functional. They helped us as little children when we couldn't figure things out for ourselves. So they helped us make sense in some way that left us feeling like we were in control. But it doesn't mean they were true. They just were functional. So without thinking about it, we look at life. Sharon Salzberg talks about looking at life through a little straw, those stories. And so then that's all we see. So for starters, to just begin to become aware, oh, I have brain damage. I'm looking at life through just a little straw. What if there's more information here? And what if I gave myself permission to inquire? I want to offer a little caveat here in terms of the permission to inquire. How to say this? Well, let's go with the politics analogy. Let's imagine that I have had for these last 8 years a particular political view that is embedded in a certain story. If I were to begin to challenge that, think of what kinds of repercussions there might be in my life, my relationships, my sense of myself in the world, my value. And it might be a little rocky. So that when we start in earnest to really look at cultivating happiness, what we may find is that we bump into some kind of heavy traffic going in the other direction. And so again, it's helpful to have some skillful guidance with that, hence the Thursday night meetings. to have some skillful guidance with that, because otherwise we can feel like we're just getting mowed down by the traffic, by all the reasons why it's wrong, and I alone of all the world do not deserve to be happy. And furthermore, it's easier to just kind of stay with whatever I've always done. So just to know that when we start working in earnest, if we get a little turbulence, that's actually kind of a good sign. Now, we want a little turbulence. We don't want the plane to crash. But a little turbulence is actually kind of a good thing, because it means we're actually, it's sort of like, when I do the PT, where she said, the idea is not to be in excruciating pain, she told me. But of course it's a little uncomfortable. I've gotten to a place actually where when it's really uncomfortable, I'm kind of happy because I know something valuable is happening. So it's sort of like that with happiness. This is Sharon again. When we have the courage to begin to put down the straw and view the sky as it is, vast and unimpeded, then we can recognize the varied perspective each straw gives us. We can recognize the difference between our very favorite straw, our most accustomed straw, our exquisitely preserved straw, and the sky itself. If we hold the straw skillfully, we will be able to put it down sometimes and look nakedly at the sky. If we hold beliefs skillfully, we will not get entangled in them, but will see them as the mental constructs that they are. When we claim our right to question everything, including our beliefs, we can unhook from our dependence on what is familiar and let in the heartfelt, open, fresh quality of faith and happiness. So, well, we can imagine that, this is in reference to another question, we'll be exploring this more as we go along. Well, we can imagine that happiness really comes about primarily through sensory happiness, through sensory experience, and it's exactly where we all begin and where we all need to begin. There's a lot to say about that. I can hear disagreements on that one. But we'll go into that later. That while we can imagine that even sensory happiness is not a passive or special thing, but rather is universally available to all, regardless of the circumstances of our lives. So regardless of how much sensory happiness there is. And it's an outcome of how we train and use our minds. So it's not dependent on the circumstances of our lives, but is an outcome of how we train. There's a story about the Dalai Lama teaching in Central Park, and he started out by saying, he says, in many ways it hasn't been an easy life. Well, now there's an understatement. He gets to be the head of a nation at 16, gets to flee in the dark of night from armed warriors who are trying to kill him, moves to another country, sets up residence, and then spends much of his days meeting with every single Tibetan refugee who comes to India and hearing their stories. So he says, in many ways it hasn't been an easy life. Well, you could say that. And then he apparently giggled, and he says, but you know, I'm pretty happy. He's onto something. And what he's teaching just by that statement is that it's possible for us too. We don't have to be chased in the dark of night through the mountains with people trying to kill us in order to find happiness. That nevertheless, this is the very same Dalai Lama who cannot understand how Westerners don't see that as their birthright. So the series will be about managing our minds, and I propose also managing our nervous systems. We have to, in some places, in some ways, retrain our nervous systems as well as our minds, and we'll be working with that. And here's where I really would love your guidance and support, because I think your questions are going to be kind of, guiding what comes next. I'm going to ask you at the very end, which is coming shortly, what you think the theme of the first drop-in session will be on Thursday, September 22nd. And I believe it's already posted. It was in the weekly announcements. And bear with us while this is a new form of teaching, which I haven't done before. And so we're just kind of fiddling with it to see what's efficient and what works. So if you have better ideas about how we're doing what we're doing, please feel free to share them. Anyway, on Thursday, the 22nd, I want those sessions to be ones where you can ask perhaps more intimate questions, and where we will do more practice, kind of develop more practices than we have time for on a Tuesday night. So the Tuesday nights are going to be sort of setting a frame, and then on roughly 2 weeks later, there will be a Thursday night gathering. You just drop in if you want to. The link will be on the web. We do ask you to register, because if there's something that needs to change at the last minute, it's hard to imagine quite what those will be, but we all know they happen. If there's something that needs to be changed, we just would like a way of communicating with you. So that's all that's about. So sometimes the capacity to experience happiness is obscured by what I call a burp of some sort that relates to some of our early conditioning. And that we can see that and work with it. So the challenge of our practice is to revise the stories that we tell ourselves, to retrain our nervous systems, to retrain our minds, to cultivate real, enduring happiness. I want to read you a poem that I know you're familiar with, kind of a long poem from David White. Oops, wait a minute. If anybody wants, here's a list of my passwords. That isn't supposed to be there. Let's see if I have the whole poem. Yeah, I do. So the title of the poem is The True Love, which I know some of you know. And the story that David tells about it is that a group of nuns asked him to write about Jesus walking on water. He asked him to write a poem. He was going to give a talk to them, and they asked him to talk to that theme. So I first heard this poem actually at a wedding, but he didn't write it about romantic or intimate relational love. He wrote it about what we're talking about. So just bear that in mind as you hear the words, because otherwise you can think, well, this has to do with, human relationships and, mine don't work well. So the true love. David says there is a faith in loving fiercely the one who is rightfully yours. Especially if you have waited years. And especially if a part of you never believed you could deserve this loved and beckoning hand held out to you this way. I am thinking of faith now and the testaments of loneliness and what we feel we are worthy of in this world. Years ago in the Hebrides, I remember an old man who walked every morning on the gray stones to the shore of baying seals, who would press his hat to his chest in the blustering salt wind and say his prayer to the turbulent Jesus hidden in the water. And I think of the story of the storm and everyone waking and seeing the distant yet familiar figure calling to them. That's Jesus walking on water, calling, coming out. If you don't know the story, Jesus was walking on water to the apostles who were out in their fishing boat, and they saw him. And I think of the story of the storm and everyone waking and seeing the distant yet familiar figure far across the water calling to them, and how we are all preparing for that abrupt waking and that calling and that moment we have to say yes, except it will not come so grandly, so biblically, but more subtly and intimately in the face of the one you know you have to love. So that then, when we finally step out of the boat toward them, we find everything holds us and everything confirms our courage. And if you wanted to drown, you could, but you don't. Because finally, after all these struggles, after all this struggle and all these years, you don't want to anymore. You've simply had enough of drowning. And you want to live, and you want to love, and you will walk across any territory and any darkness, however fluid and however dangerous, to take the one hand, the one hand you know belongs in yours. There's a quote from Stephen Levine. He says, there's a story about an intellectual youth who felt he could learn everything from books. He read about the stars and became an astronomer. He read about history and he became a historian. He read about swimming and drowned. Some things we can only learn, Stephen says, by wading in slowly from the direct experience of the ocean of being lapping against our body. To enter this process directly is to participate in the healing we took birth for. Is to participate in the healing we took birth for. Is to become fully alive. The secret of healing, Stephen says, the secret of healing there is no secret at all. Healing, he says, is an open book. You are now on page 13. We're all on page 13, you know. I'm on page 7. So the invitation for us now, we don't have to like judge or condemn our sense of unworthiness or undeservedness. We don't have to do that. We don't have to fix it all tonight so that we're all squeaky clean tomorrow morning. Yeah, if you want to, you could. I mean, if you can, fine, great. But if not, okay. But the invitation is to cultivate even a tiny bit of faith. Consider the possibility that all of these people, that Stephen Levine and Sharon Salzberg and John Wellwood and the Dalai Lama, are onto something. That they have teachings to offer us. That we can do this. Well, we each have that tiny bit of faith, or we wouldn't be sitting here tonight, or we wouldn't be on Zoom at home. We do. So the invitation is to cultivate that, and through inquiry together, to see what we might discover. And so now we end with faith. Remember Sharon Salzberg telling us about the bakery. She says, the Buddha holds out his hand, offering to bring us directly inside. So, a year of inquiring together. What do you think we should do in our drop-in session? Maybe, if you want to write it, fine. If you want to speak to it now. Does anything come up that you would like to practice more with? You can write it to me, you can email me, you can speak to it now. What do you think is needed?
Sharon, I think we need retraining exercises.
I have faith that there are some thoughts out there. So please know that it is fully my intention to have you help teach this course, this series, by speaking to what puzzles you, by speaking to what is needed, by speaking to what you're hungry for. Send it to me, speak it. And one of the things about those Thursday night groups is that there'll be, I think, a little bit more intimate opportunities to maybe share together some of those kinds of puzzles. Let's see, I think that's it. Yes? Oh, yeah? What does it say? Can you read it? We need retraining exercises like what? Oh, okay. Yeah. Do you want to do that? Do you want to do more of that? As I said, my original intention was to launch, like tonight, the talk was going to be, and the practice was going to be around sensory happiness. But since that was such a beautiful question last week, I decided to do this. So do we want more exercises along deservingness? Do you want that, or do you not need that? Yeah, Barbara. Right. Right. Great. Okay. All right. Mm-hmm. I don't know if everybody heard the question, but how can I be happy? You know, my inclination is to work really hard to make other people happy, but I tend to kind of overlook myself in the process. All right, well, since you spoke, we'll do that on Thursday, the 22nd. Okay. Thank you. That's what we'll do. And if any of you online, if you have other thoughts and you want to email me, sometimes we don't quite catch all the chats, so just know, and if you can't figure out how to email me, just send them to Dolly, who will forward them on to me. You can just do it through the website. Anyway, my email address is Sharon, BB, that's easy enough, at the letter I, before the word meditation.org. So if you've got, more questions. But how, and that, by the way, was also a question that came up on the sheets of paper I had last week. How can I be happy? Sort of some variant of how can I be happy when other people are miserable? And isn't my job to serve others? And, so there were quite a few questions along those lines. Great. Thank you. That's what we'll do. All right. Lesson plan. All right. Thank you, everybody. Blessings.